All right, well, welcome to the first section of our lesson. Um, Later on, I'll go ahead and include the recording from the group. I didn't turn that on until about halfway through again. My bad. So I'm going to go over the beginning of the lesson here of Daniel chapter 3. And then when we get to the point where I did hit record, we'll have the whole group come on. So as we talked about last week, Nebuchadnezzar, at the beginning of his reign, must have felt his position quite precarious. Most ancient monarchs would, because there's just so much intrigue and there are many assassinations and all kinds of things like that. So he had threatened to kill all his wise men, and he ends up going and making this gigantic image. Maybe the vision he had gave him an idea for an image. But this gigantic image that he wanted to build south of the city of Babylon. And what they end up doing is building, and it's probably an image of Marduk, the chief Babylonian god, covered in gold. Now, how they built these things, I don't know if you've ever taken a pottery class or seen how they would build big statues out of clay, but you'd have to build it in sections. So you might have like a quarter of a head. It goes in this kiln and gets baked, and then they apply a gold mixture, and it goes into a kiln and it melts and becomes layered with gold, and then they assemble the statue together, almost like the Statue of Liberty. You know, it's a shell. It was assembled in pieces shipped from France. They would do giant statues that way. So this giant statue is built, and Nebuchadnezzar wants to set it up as a loyalty test. You know, there's oftentimes a state religion to these ancient empires, like Rome had the emperor cult and a sacrifice of the genius of the emperor. If not, like Christians wouldn't, you couldn't do state service, you'd lose your post or be killed. So Nebuchadnezzar comes up with this idea, and in verse 3, he makes all his satraps, his prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, all the people who are serving his empire, he makes them perform this loyalty test. And he wants it to where he knows the people who are for him and for the state, for the empire, and he wants to unite them around this image. There's also like a theme song or a national anthem, obviously played with all these different instruments. This is Nebuchadnezzar is going to enforce this and say that if you don't do it, you're going to be executed. So he goes to this place called the Plain of Dura. Dura sounds like an Aramaic word for wall, so it could be the flat part of the wall that's in the plains. It also might sound like an area where there's two hills and maybe a flat place in the middle, so maybe he just had a good place to set up an image where people could sit around the hills and look at it. But it's covered in gold, and it's like 90 feet by 9 feet broad. It's probably on a big cube, and actually there's an archaeological ruin south of Babylon. There's this giant cube that looks like a statue used to sit on it. So it may be where it was, but probably of Marduk, or maybe of an idealized muscular Nebuchadnezzar. And that's what the chapter kind of finds us doing in the background. As we're looking at Nebuchadnezzar setting up, saying, I need my state to be unified. So Nebuchadnezzar was a builder, and I'm showing you a little bit here of the Ishtar Gate. And the Ishtar Gate, the section of it they found under the sands of Babylon, because for a long time they thought Babylon is a myth, the Bible's just making it up. And then they found in the sands of southern Iraq an ancient city. It was Babylon, the ruins of Babylon, and they found this gate, moved it to Germany to a museum. But it's the Ishtar Gate, and it's this dark blue brickwork with these animals and this relief all over it. I mean, it's beautiful, and it was huge. And it was one of the gates going into the city. And, you know, they dismantled it in the early 20th century, packed it up, and put it in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The gate is 50 feet high. The original foundations are 45 feet below that. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar was a great builder. The Babylonians love to brag about their building, just like the Assyrians like to brag about their killing. You know, the Assyrians were violent and love to say, look at all the people we've killed. The Babylonians, they did a lot of warfare, but they love to brag about their building. You've also heard of probably the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which is King Nebuchadnezzar's. He built a ziggurat and then put water going down it and all these trees and fruit trees and orchards, and it looked like a giant fruit-covered mountain. And he did that for one of his wives, who was Median. She wanted to be reminded of her mountainous homeland, so he built that. He was a great builder. And one of the articles I had you read talked about how all the bricks in Babylon had stamped on them from the brick press. Nebuchadnezzar built me, the son of this guy, and he loved to brag about his building because that was like the chief virtue of a Babylonian monarch. So he's building his state. He commands everyone to worship it. And so what happens is, remember last chapter, Daniel bailed him out, and he was going to kill all the Chaldeans, Nebuchadnezzar was, and Daniel saved them by telling the interpretation of the dream. Well, they still don't like Daniel or the Hebrew kids. They're mad because they're not like them. So verse 8 of chapter 3 says, therefore at the time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, made a decree that every man who hears all these instruments and does not fall down and worship, it must fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews that you have appointed over the affairs of the province, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So the Babylonians had no concept of monotheism. They knew that Daniel's God could interpret dreams. Nebuchadnezzar didn't think that was the only God, or that he was more powerful even. In fact, he probably thought that Marduk, the Babylonian god, was more powerful than the Hebrew God because he had beat them in battle and taken them captive. He probably just thought, well, he's really good for dream interpretation, but that's about it. Well, God's about to educate him in this lesson. So the fiery furnace, let's talk about what the fiery furnace probably was. Some of you may have seen a kiln before, a pottery kiln. It's got a shape like a cone. It's got a spot in the bottom where you put the pottery in, and then a spout at the top where the flames come out. Some of you may have a chimenea in your yard, which is the same concept. It looks like a giant vase with a mouth, and the flames shoot out the top. The fiery furnace is probably like a couple of stories tall, maybe 3 stories tall. It had earthenware ramps built around it to feed stuff into the fire. And then down at floor level, it had a space where you could put your metal, your bricks, whatever you're trying to bake in it. And you would see that from ground level while the flames would shoot up 3 stories high and go out the smokestack in the top. Because Nebuchadnezzar had built this image, his workmen had all built it outside the city, they were probably right by where the furnace was to build it. And so Nebuchadnezzar has this fiery furnace that he's been using to build stuff. And he's like, if you don't worship it, I'm going to throw you in there. So this is kind of interesting because where we're at, verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar, he hears that these Hebrews don't worship this image. In furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. You're going to tell from this, Nebuchadnezzar really likes them. He doesn't kill them immediately. He gives them a chance. Hey, think better of this, gentlemen. You need to worship this image. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve any of my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear these instruments, fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Like I said, Nebuchadnezzar probably thought that the Jewish God was really good at interpreting dreams. He did not know that he could also save from a fiery furnace. So what ends up happening is they give a great answer. Boys do. They're still teenagers at this time, probably. Nebuchadnezzar, gave him his spiel, and they say to him, they answered and said to the king, verse 16, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. He will deliver us out of your hand. O king, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Great Jewish answer, great Christian answer to this day. God can do anything. He can save us from anything. But even if he doesn't, if he chooses to let us go under this, we're not going to break the Ten Commandments. We're not going to violate our commitment to God. We're not going to deny him. You know, back in chapter 1, Daniel and these same boys had done this about the food. Nebuchadnezzar didn't hear about that. The chief eunuch did, but they had told him, we can't violate the law, eat horse flesh or eat something sacrificed to a Babylonian god. Remember I told you the ends of their names have these Hebrew root suffixes for God: Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, Daniel. The El and the Yah suffixes show that they are named for the God they serve. Their parents probably told them at a young age. The law says, if our country doesn't serve the Lord, we're going to be taken away from it. Look what's happening around you, boys. One day armies may come and take you away from mom and dad, but you never forget your Lord. No matter what country they take you to, he is your Lord. And they didn't in chapter 1. They didn't in chapter 2. And now chapter 3, once again. These three boys, they sit there and they go, okay, throw us in. We're not breaking the Ten Commandments. God's our God. They may have remembered the book of Isaiah, where Isaiah 150 years before this prophesied, you'll pass through the fires and not be harmed. Either way, they said, we're not serving this God and bowing down to it. And the rest of the story unfolds. We'll see that discussion group. He ends up throwing them into the furnace, but not just throwing them in. He has it heated up worse than it ever was. And he ends up throwing them in. And remember, like I said, it looked like a chimenea, so you could see in the mouth of it where the fire was. You could see what was in it. And when they get thrown in from the top, because there's a big earthen mound around it, they get thrown in, they get down into the fiery furnace, and he looks, and verse 24 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. So have you ever been watching a football game in the comfort of your own house in your lazy boy, your feet are up, and something happens all of a sudden, you just slam your feet down and you're on the floor and you're walking towards the TV? Have y'all ever done that?
Of course.
Usually it's because you're happy. Sometimes it could be because you're mad. Imagine that's the type of excitement level that hit King Nebuchadnezzar when he's out of his chair walking towards the fiery furnace going, what's that? He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. And Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And all the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads were not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come on them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their house laid in ruins, for there's no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So it's the same pattern as the last 2 stories. These Hebrew boys, teenagers, serve God. God delivers them, and Nebuchadnezzar, more in his mind each time, realizes we're dealing with something really weird here. And he trusts them more and more over his own advisors that share his same ethnicity. Any questions or comments or anything you can think of now that we're done with the story?
Where was Daniel during all this?
A good question. If you look back at the end of chapter 2, last verse, verse 49, the last sentence, it says, "But Daniel remained at the king's court." So Daniel was an advisor inside the king's court, inside the palace structure. Whenever Nebuchadnezzar makes this image of gold, it sounds like it's outside of the city gates. And he
Mine
calls,
says
go
mine
ahead.
says he's sitting in the gate.
Yeah. Oh, yours says that in the end of chapter 2?
Yeah.
Well,
But
this
Daniel
one,
sat in the gate of the king.
well, yeah, that's where the king conducts his business. But this image is outside the city, and the people who are brought to it are the governors, the province commanders, and all the people who run the administration of the empire. It sounds to me, and most commentaries say that, Daniel was basically part of almost like the royal family. He would not have had to come out of the palace and go take any type of loyalty test. He would not have had to come outside the city and meet with all these really people that were lower than him. He was probably in the court just working for the king at this time, because he's not mentioned. And we know if he had been there, he would have stood up. He wouldn't have kneeled down. But he's absent from the story. And that's probably why, because if you look at it, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. You got to think they're probably sitting in the DMV or sitting in the Department of Agriculture office or somewhere. They're out there working a desk somewhere in the province of Babylon. And Daniel's back in the air conditioning.
Well, Josh, you help me, because when you just read this, it sort of sounds like maybe Nebuchadnezzar was becoming a believer in the one true God, but actually since he worshiped many gods, more than one, he was just kind of going to add this one on with the rest of the crowd.
Yeah, he still is thinking like a polytheist.
Right.
And you'll see that in the next chapter. Now, I've heard people say that King Nebuchadnezzar, they believe that towards the end of his life, especially after his humiliation, he became a believer in the one true God. And that when you get to heaven, you're going to see King Nebuchadnezzar up there. I don't know. I don't know that the Bible specifically cares about the state of King Nebuchadnezzar's soul. It's telling you that God is just, even when Israel is disobedient, God gets glory and God protects them. Daniel is primarily a book about God's deliverance of Israel. Now, I think Nebuchadnezzar, towards the end of his life, realized this God is above me. I don't know how to deal with him. He's stronger than all the other gods I know. Now, whether he became a believer, we'll know when we get up to heaven. But it sounds like each chapter he's learning a bit more, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
He had a lot of time when he was out there eating that grass.
Oh, yeah.
Had a lot of time to think, didn't he?
Yep. By the way, they think they have found Abednego's name on a tablet, because like I said, they're still uncovering a lot of tablets from Babylon, and they have found one of the royal officials who has the same name from the same time of Nebuchadnezzar's administration. So he might have been confirmed outside of Scripture. There are also some questions on whether or not, because Daniel's name, there's a very similar name found. We don't know for sure if it's him, but a lot of this stuff that happens, they found actually in the south part of Babylon, about 3 miles outside of the city center, a big rock platform. Could have been the platform this statue sat on. So there's archaeological evidence all over the place that what the Bible talks about is the way it was on the ground in history. And this is how ancient kings operated. They wanted the religion and the government to be the same thing. And God keeps throwing a wrench in Nebuchadnezzar's administration. But
Looks like that's the way we're going.
yep, that's true. Any other questions or comments about chapter 3? Let me ask y'all a question about today. What is the golden image in our culture? That if you don't bow down to it, you're in trouble. What's the golden image?
Well, it depends on your age and depends on your situation. You know, you get to be my age, golden image kind of becomes Medicare. Or, you know, they're trying to make government the golden image.
Yeah.
Money's a golden image. I mean, it could be anything, Josh. Just depends on the individual. In my opinion, I might have a better idea about that.
Yeah, health concerns, that can be a golden image for me.
The leftist agenda. More and more, if you don't speak politically correctly, you're going to get slapped down.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially in universities. You know, I hear about it all the time about professors being fired or professors having protesters outside their office saying, until the university fires them, we're not taking classes, because they say something as simple as, you know, there's a biological difference between a boy and a girl that can't be changed. And that's the golden image at that point.
Yep.
There are, you know, every society has them. I remember a friend from the country my wife's from, and the ruling party, you know, it's a one-party state in China. The ruling party, you know, has a loyalty test, and one of the things you have to do is kind of claim to be an atheist and say you're not a Christian. And one of our friends, she had become a Christian in her teenage years, and her parents wanted her to denounce it so she could join the party and get a good job. Because without the party, you may not have the guaranteed state job. And she just told him, she said, I don't care. And they said, well, you're not going to get a good job. She said, that doesn't matter. You don't betray the Lord for a job. And she stuck to her convictions. And you know, that really is a golden, I mean, that's the exact same thing, a loyalty oath for state service that makes you deny God in order to enjoy the benefit of serving the state and having that type of security, and she would not take it. That happens today. Does anybody else have any closing comments, questions, or anything that just jumps out at you about this? You know, who was the fourth person in the furnace?
Jesus Christ.
Elijah?
Most commentators and theologians believe it was the pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, Word, a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, and that whenever Nebuchadnezzar saw him, you know, he'd heard stories of what the gods might look like. All he could say was the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods. That there were stories, we even know these stories in ancient Greece about Hercules. Hercules was a son of Zeus, and he is glorious in appearance and muscular and strong and had superhuman strength. Something about this fourth person in the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar knew He was divine and was not human. He must have looked beyond physically in stature and in glory and in power the other three boys. And that fourth one did not come out. He was just there to protect his servants. And it's pretty interesting because when you hear about the appearance of Jesus in the book of Revelation, in his glory, and you think Nebuchadnezzar probably saw something that day that made him, all of a sudden his statue looked like a dilapidated, crumbly, moldy kid's toy compared to this being. And all of a sudden because I'm sure he thought pretty highly of himself, all of a sudden he
Yeah.
wasn't all that great. And all of a sudden all he could do was talk about, if anybody says anything bad about that person we saw in the fiery furnace, I'm going to pull his arms and legs off and make his house a trash heap. He got educated.
Josh, how is it that the men that threw them into the fire were burned up because it was so hot, but Nebuchadnezzar could get close enough to see the four people in there?
So remember how I told you these things were shaped. I wish I had like a drawing app on here. I don't think I can, but they're shaped almost like a vase with a bowl on the bottom and then a big chimney.
Yeah.
And there's an earthen mound built around one side of it where you can go and feed stuff down into the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the bottom there's a portal or a door where you would put the metal in that, or the clay that had to be baked by the heat. And so the way that they say they think it happened is that they were taken to the top where the flames were shooting out. I know that when I have a bonfire with my chimenea, flames will shoot out the top because it sucks wind through the door.
That's the
Got
chimney.
it.
Yeah.
All right.
There it is right
that was
there.
what I had figured.
So they're throwing them in from the top near the earthen ramps. And the flames are shooting out so hot and so far that they get that close and they just combust. And they die, but the three youths don't. They fall down into the flames, and Nebuchadnezzar's watching the door, and he's like, he gets out of his chair and starts walking towards it going, "What is that?" But he's not where the heat's rising out of it like those men were.
Okay, gotcha.
He's looking at ground level with it.
I've always thought that the Lord God stepped in and cooled it down so he could get near. That's just
That could be it too.
Yeah.
But he and that's why he calls them out. He says, "Come out." They threw them down into it, but they can come out because at ground level is that smelting door, basically, where they do all their metal work and get it. That's the people don't realize. The ancient world had some pretty cool technology with metalworking. They knew how to make subterranean chambers where they would feed air through giant reeds, pipes into the ground, and they almost like a bellows. And so a lot of these things were like 2 or 3 story structures designed to have air going in different areas to have the fire superheated so they could melt this metal. They found out how to do that pretty early in civilization. And when they talk about heating it 7 times up, that's an idiom saying like make it as hot as it goes. It doesn't mean necessarily that they were measuring it with a thermometer and said, "Well, it's up 7 times hotter than normal." They just mean, hey, listen, put extra people blowing in the pipes, have some big guy jumping on the bellows really fast, and put the lighter wood in there because I want it super hot. Put the red oak, They just wanted as hot as possible to make an example of these boys, and it didn't work. Well, next week, read chapter 4, and we're going to talk about a very interesting period in Nebuchadnezzar's life. I'm going to give you some resources on this, but they found some inscriptions. These inscriptions, because they're in poetic form, line by line, you have to kind of interpret them, and they were damaged. So we don't have every line. when you read these inscriptions, they talk about a period in Nebuchadnezzar's life where he wouldn't listen to his advisors, and where his advisors something like they couldn't find him. Like, it's very cryptic. We don't know what it's talking about. People who believe the Bible to be true say that, look, if you take this and pair it up with the Bible, there's a period in Nebuchadnezzar's life where he's out of the picture, and his advisors are mad at him, and they can't talk to him. And so we may have found evidence that during Nebuchadnezzar's life, he was absent for a while. He was not ruling the state. And so we're going to talk about that next week. I'm going to send out to y'all that the inscription off that tablet and what they do have of it, some theories about it. I'm also going to, because we're getting to the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, I'm going to send you some other stuff about him, and just, we're going to kind of finish up next week with Nebuchadnezzar's life, because Daniel will keep working through different administrations after him, but we'll close up on him next week and move on. Also, just something to think about is when we get to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is whenever the future, Daniel's future and some of it our future, get revealed. I'm going to go a lot slower. We're not going to do one chapter a week. You look at even chapter 7, it's dense. I mean, the visions, the interpretation, and these visions tie in with so much in the Gospels and so much in the book of Revelation. I don't want to just study Daniel. I want to look at what Jesus taught, what John taught, and tie it in and say, what can we learn about what Daniel's using here in this apocalyptic motif? So we're going to slow down in chapter 7. And like I said, it changes. It changes from Aramaic to Hebrew. It changes from history to prophecy. And we're gonna change our approach during that. So enjoyed it. I hope you're being edified by these stories. Well, next week I will see y'all for Daniel chapter 4. Thank you for being here, and God bless you all this week. Hope you have a good one, and see you next Sunday, if not before. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See y'all later.